Why, hello there, and welcome to this video. My name is Leah. I'm a new progressive YouTuber. I'm doing a Wednesday and a Saturday show where I talk about the big stories, cultural trends, whatever I feel like discussing. Also, I can use my political energy for some good in this world. And yeah, that is why I'm here. If you want to be a part of this little journey, then I'm happy to have you. This is my second segment today. We are talking about the Supreme Court reform that Biden proposed, and we just finished talking about Kamala's campaign stuff. And I do encourage you to check out that first segment as well, but we will just be jumping straight into this one right here. So the first article we have here is Biden proposed enforceable ethics code and term limits for Supreme Court. You may have seen this, but he actually did do like a public address where he talked about these things and discussed like what he wants to do for Supreme Court reform. I don't think I need to really explain why this is super important and why we need Supreme Court reform. If you have been alive recently, then you are probably aware that the Supreme Court is extremist. It's extremely corrupt. It's at an all-time low in terms of approval rating. And it's not working for the American people. Like, the Supreme Court is absolutely bought and paid off by billionaires and wealthy donors who are simply just milking the court for everything that they possibly can. The Supreme Court is essentially public enemy number one right now. Like, rolling back civil rights is unprecedented and actually just shocking and appalling. So hopefully people keep that in mind as we move towards this presidential election. But I am happy to talk about here how Joe Biden has proposed some reform. Now, I do not want to show you the long rambling video of Joe Biden discussing Supreme Court reform and stuff like that, because it was just extremely long and rambly. And honestly, he is so hard to listen to. So I'm not going to make you go through that. But essentially, to summarize what he was discussing, he wants to try to have like an enforceable code of ethics, because right now, essentially, the code of ethics is very loose in the Supreme Court and there's no real enforcement mechanism. So like, there are people who have conflicts of interest. There are people who are receiving money and then not reporting it, receiving gifts and not reporting it. And there's no real punishment for that. And honestly, it's all like sort of like an honor system. Like, these judges are just justices are supposed to be so honorable and so have so much integrity that they don't need like an outside enforcement mechanism. Well, we all know that that's just a bunch of bullshit. As we have all seen with like stories about Clarence Thomas and all these other justices like receiving exorbitant amounts of bribery and just not reporting it. But yeah, on top of that, he also wants to do term limits for the Supreme Court, because right now it's a lifetime appointment, which is really rough because, you know, if certain justices age out at the same time and either retire or pass away, as they happen to do, then it can lead to a rather like unfair, unbalanced court, as we are clearly seeing in our modern day. So as far as I know, for the term limits, it's like 18 years is what he's proposing for the term limits. Biden's proposal would limit justices to 18-year terms, a system that he says would make nominations more predictable, less arbitrary, and reduce the chances that a single president could shape the court for generations to come. There's a big problem. The Constitution gives all federal judges lifetime tenure unless they resign, retire, or are removed. There are ideas about how to impose term limits without an amendment, but if such a law passed and were challenged in the court, the justices could end up ruling on it, and it's unclear how they'd come down. How would a code of ethics be enforced? The Supreme Court didn't have a formal code of ethics until last year, when the justices adopted one in the face of sustained criticism over undisclosed trips and gifts from wealthy benefactors to some justices like Clarence Thomas. It still lacks a means of enforcement, something Biden says is common sense. Members of Congress, for example, generally can't accept gifts more than $50. So he's kind of proposing 18-year term limits so that, you know, the justices can kind of come in and out of the court at a more regular pace, and it's less likely that the court will be packed by any particular president. As well, he wants to put forward enforcement mechanisms for these justices with their code of ethics. Now, the issue is that to do all this, you need a constitutional amendment, because if you pass a law, as I mentioned, the Supreme Court could rule on it. And if the Supreme Court's ruling on it, they're likely just going to shut it down, because like, why would they want to shorten their own terms? And why would they want to enforce their own code of ethics? Like that is sort of against their own selfish obviously, but selfish personal interest. And when you're talking about a constitutional amendment, you're talking like, I think it's 2/3 of Congress and stuff like that. Like, you're talking about needing a big majority, a super majority to vote this kind of thing into effect. And that is something that I just, quite frankly, do not think is going to happen. Do I wish it would happen? Do I think this is a great idea? Do I think that this is something that we need? We absolutely need. Yes. Yes, we need this right now. We need this today. We need this yesterday. Actually, we need this like 2 years ago. We need this actually like 8 years ago. We need this. This is something that I think people have been talking about for a long time because there have been a lot of shenanigans with the Supreme Court in the past. 4 to 8 years. It's been a common conversation. It's been a common topic, but it's always been viewed as extremely radical. Like, court reforms were viewed as something that like you just don't talk about. If you talk about it, you're radical. You're one of those radical progressives. But here we have Joe Biden, the most centrist of all times. We have Joe Biden here talking about Supreme Court reform and talking about how we need it. So I do want to discuss how, like, even though this is probably dead on arrival, there's not enough time left in his presidency, this is just not going to happen because of constitutional amendment in this kind of Congress. You're just not going to get that kind of popular support behind something like this. But the good thing, the positive part about this story is that Joe Biden is talking about this. He's making a big deal about it. He's going to talk to, people in Congress about it. He's going to try to represent this point that it's important and that we need Supreme Court reform. And honestly, what he's doing is he's kind of just making it more commonplace to talk about. He's kind of making it more acceptable to talk about. He's basically making it more of a centrist position instead of making it this extremely radical progressive thing that people seem to think it is. So I am extremely pessimistic about this actually passing or going into effect or having a constitutional amendment passed. I do think it's incredibly important that Biden is just talking about this in general and just bringing this up, and that this will be something that he pushes for in the last little bits of his presidential term. Personally, I'm going to be paying attention to the media cycle and how they cover this. And I'm going to be trying to see, like, is this viewed as extremely radical? Is this viewed as Biden being extremely radical? Or is this viewed as more of a centrist position now that Biden has backed it? And I want to see kind of like maybe if this causes certain people to migrate over more towards like, yes, we need reforms. I don't know. We'll see. Now, quickly, I do just want to show, this is an article from a right-wing source, and basically just want to discuss how they're viewing this. Biden's Supreme Court reforms are unconstitutional. So right off the rip, they're going to oppose this. If you look down at the article, Speaker Mike Johnson said it's dead on arrival, and they're very good at falling in line. So we're probably going to see most Republicans fall in line here. Getting 2/3 of, Republicans and Democrats together is just not. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. It's unfortunate, but to them, this is just extremely radical stuff. And obviously, they're pretty stoked about what the Supreme Court is doing on the right, even though it's very, very against the interest of the American people. It's great for Donald Trump, and it's great for the rich and the wealthy and stuff like that. So the Republican Party is pretty ecstatic over how the Supreme Court has been ruling lately, and I don't think they want to see that stop. I mean, the Supreme Court literally ruled Donald Trump a God King president. Like, for his second term, he's allowed to just break every law on the face of this earth, assassinate political opponents, forever presidency. And he can do whatever he wants. He can just do whatever he wants. That is, of course, if he is elected president. So yeah, I have to wrap up this story here. It's kind of a short one, but I just wanted to talk about the idea of Supreme Court reform, how Biden is bringing it up, how he's talking about it. I think this is an important story because this is something that, like, we need to build energy behind it, because we've seen in recent history that if the American people push hard enough for something, then there's actually a good chance that we can maybe possibly get it. I don't want to be too hopium about this, but we had a lot of people saying that Biden will not drop out of this race. That's impossible. It's not going to happen. It's a pipe dream. Well, guess what? He dropped out of the race. So you were wrong. Like, the people have power. Our voices do matter. And so talking about this at the dinner table, talking about how, like, hey, Supreme Court reform, stuff like that. I know that that's whatever, but I just think it's important to be informed about this particular topic. Anyway, that's all for this segment. Go ahead and leave me a like. If you want to subscribe, be a part of my first 100 subscribers, that would mean a lot to me. I would super appreciate that. And if you want to leave a comment down below, I would love to know what you think about the Supreme Court reforms, what you think about what the Supreme Court has been doing lately, and like whether you think there will be any change in the Supreme Court due to like how radical that they've been. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start working on my third segment. I appreciate having you here. And I just have one little favor to ask you before you go, and that's for you to drink some water.